Hi there and welcome to TechPlower. It is TechPlower camera comparison time. Now it's the iPhone X versus the iPhone 12 Pro. I've noticed many of you watching my videos are not subscribed to my channel. If you like my content, please help my channel grow by clicking the subscribe button. I really appreciate it. During this comparison, I kept the default settings on both phones except where explicitly described. And for the still photos, I kept the highest quality possible. This is quite a long video, so if you want to jump to any specific section, I've time-coded it for you in the description. So let's get started. Let's start with the main cameras and still photos. We have this beautiful mountain view, and both cameras have their HDR set to off. Both cameras provide beautiful photos, but the iPhone 12 Pro shows more detail. As you can see if you compare the trees in the foreground and even the house to the right. The iPhone 12 Pro also provides more consistent brightness throughout the photo, and the sky is much closer to real life. The iPhone X handles the glare from the sun much better though than the iPhone 12 Pro. If we switch HDR on both phones, I don't see much difference in the iPhone 12 Pro photo using HDR. The sky is a little bit more evenly colored and you get a little bit more brighter lower part of the photo. The iPhone X though shows some improvements here. More contrast of shadows in the trees, and the clouds are not as overexposed as without HDR. So what happens if we have HDR set to auto? Both phones seem to choose not to use HDR, since these photos are very similar to the ones that I took when HDR was off. So the same thing applies here as for those photos. So let's take a look at some close-up shots. Let's focus on the iron pole. Both cameras are able to get a good focus on the iron pole and manage to blur the background a little bit, though the iPhone 12 Pro is able to get more blur in the background than the iPhone X. The iPhone 12 Pro photo is also brighter and shows much more detail in the iron pole than the iPhone X, and doesn't overexpose the sky as the iPhone X does. Now let's focus on the background behind the pole. Both cameras are able to frame the iron pole well and give it some blur. But again, the iPhone 12 Pro photo is brighter and more detailed than the iPhone X photo. Now let's try to get the bokeh effect going with the background behind this fire hydrant. I wanted to see how the different lenses handle this. So let's start with the ultra-wide on the iPhone 12 Pro, but with the main lens on the iPhone X, because it doesn't have an ultra-wide lens. I had to step back a little bit with the iPhone X to get the fire hydrant into the shot. We of course get a much wider shot on the iPhone 12 Pro. We get more blurred background on the iPhone X now, but quite similar detail on both of them. The clouds are overexposed on both the photos, but the iPhone 12 Pro shows more realistic colors of the sky. Let's switch to the main lens on the iPhone 12 Pro and use the main lens on the iPhone X again. Using the main lens on both cameras, we see a drastic difference between the photos. The iPhone 12 Pro photo has more realistic colors and shows much more detail than the iPhone X photo, which also overexposes the shot. Do you see the difference how the iPhone 12 Pro exposes the part better where the sun shines directly on the fire hydrant? Both phones provide similar blurred background, but the iPhone X background is way overexposed. Using the telephoto lens on both the phones, I usually am able to get natural bokeh effect, and was able to achieve that up to a point here. The iPhone 12 Pro again shows more detail in the photo and also captured the focus better on the fire hydrant. So using the main lens on both phones and then switch to the portrait mode settings, we of course get more blurred background in both photos. But the iPhone 12 Pro manages to blur the background more than the iPhone X. The iPhone 12 Pro also frames the fire hydrant better than the iPhone X, as you can see on the lower left part of the fire hydrant. We also get more detail in the iPhone 12 Pro picture as before. But how about panorama shots? Let's see how the phones handled panorama photos. Here we have the sun shining at the cameras, and the iPhone 12 Pro is able to handle it better here. The iPhone X is too exposed around the sun, but the iPhone 12 Pro is again having more issues with the lens glare from the sun than the iPhone X, which is a little bit annoying because the overall exposure of the iPhone 12 Pro photo is better. But this glare kind of ruins the whole photo. In this case, I would prefer the iPhone X photo, even though the exposure of the sun is way too much. In this second panorama, we don't have the sun straight at us, but still the iPhone 12 Pro struggles with the lens glare, but it manages to get the exposure and color accuracy better than the iPhone X. Since there is only one lens flare in the iPhone 12 Pro photo, I think I would prefer that one over the iPhone X this time around, since it better represents how it was in real life. Let's take some selfies with the main lens on both cameras. First, we have the sun in the background. Both cameras do a good job here, and both of them show a green lens flare on the right of the photo. Here, the iPhone X takes the better photo. Even though we get more detail in the iPhone 12 Pro photo, it is way overexposed. It seems like the iPhone 12 Pro is not using HDR in this photo, but the iPhone X seems to have chosen to use HDR. A win for the iPhone X here. Let's turn around and face the sun. Both phones take good photos here, but the iPhone 12 Pro photo is slightly better in regards to getting the brightness closer to real life and also more detail, as can be seen in my beard and the beanie. Here I'm trying to get a blurred background using the telephoto lens, and I'm able to get it a little bit blurred, especially on the left side on the iPhone 12 Pro photo. Both selfies are quite good though, in my opinion. Let's try a similar selfie using the portrait mode on both the phones. We of course get more blurred background now in both photos, but the framing of my face is better on the iPhone 12 Pro than on the iPhone X, and the focus is more sharp on my face and beanie in the iPhone 12 Pro photo. So we looked at the beautiful landscape and the beautiful selfies. Let's go inside and take a look at some low light photos. First, let's use the flash on both phones. The flash spread on the iPhone 12 Pro photo is much better here than on the iPhone X. It seems like the flash is much stronger on the iPhone 12 Pro. We see much more detail in the iPhone 12 Pro photo, since it is able to lighten up larger parts of the subject. But both phones provide good color accuracy here, even though the iPhone X photo is darker. If we turn off the flash on both phones and turn off night mode on the iPhone 12 Pro, the iPhone X struggles to get a proper focus and the photo is a little bit grainy, while the iPhone 12 Pro gets a sharp focus and the result is not as grainy as the iPhone X photo. Now if we turn night mode on the iPhone 12 Pro and keep the flash off on both phones, here the iPhone X is actually able to get a better focus than before, even though I changed no settings there. We see a drastic difference in the iPhone 12 Pro photo, where the night mode is able to provide more brightness and detail into the photo. Let's try a selfie with a bright background behind me. The flash is set to auto on both phones and night mode is off on the iPhone 12 Pro. The iPhone X decided to use the flash, but the iPhone 12 Pro did not. In this case, I definitely prefer the iPhone X photo. It gives a better focused and detailed photo of me compared to the iPhone 12 Pro grainy and bright photo. Here we have the flash off on both cameras and the night mode is set to auto on the iPhone 12 Pro. Even though this is a low light situation, the iPhone 12 Pro did not use night mode when this photo was taken. But this time around we get a better lit photo taken by the iPhone 12 Pro, but I would imagine that we would have gotten more detail if the iPhone 12 Pro had chosen to use night mode in this situation. The iPhone X is not able to light up my face enough in this instance, so the iPhone 12 Pro wins here. Now let's face the window and have the flash on auto on both phones and night mode on auto on the iPhone 12 Pro. It is quite clear that the iPhone X used flash in this photo, and this time around the iPhone 12 Pro used night mode. The iPhone 12 Pro photo is evenly lit, but the sharpness and focus is better on the iPhone X photo. Let's see how the cameras work outside at night. Here the iPhone X did not use its flash, and I have to say it handles the situation quite well. The iPhone 12 Pro used the night mode feature, and here we see the clear benefit of that. The lights have less glare around them and everything in the photo is better focused and has more detail than in the iPhone X photo. In this photo we have the same settings and we get similar results as before. Better lit and more detailed photo from the iPhone 12 Pro using the night mode. Here is a night and day difference where we turn off the flash on both of the phones but keep the night mode on the iPhone 12 Pro. The iPhone X photo is out of focus and we almost don't see what's in the photo. In the iPhone 12 Pro photo, on the other hand, we clearly see that this is a bench. But even though we don't get a perfect focus and a green hue from the streetlights, the subject of the photo is visible. Yet another clear difference here when using the night mode. We can see much more detail in the bright windows of the houses in the iPhone 12 Pro photo, even in the house way back in the background. Now let's take a look at a situation where the night mode feature really shines. Here we have almost no light in the surroundings and we place both phones on a tripod. Flash is off on both phones and night mode is set to 30 seconds exposure on the iPhone 12 Pro. We barely see a mast and only one star in the iPhone X photo. But on the iPhone 12 Pro photo we can clearly see both masts, the house and a lot of stars in the sky. The focus is not perfect nor the color accuracy, but it is amazing how good the photo is considering that there is almost total darkness there. One last night mode shot straight up into the sky. In the iPhone X photo we almost see nothing, but in the iPhone 12 Pro photo we can clearly see the stars in the sky. In my opinion though, the sky gets a little bit too bright, but it is a beautiful photo nevertheless. So let's take a look at still photos using the front-facing camera. When HDR is off on both phones, the sky gets similarly overexposed, but the iPhone 12 Pro photo shows better sharpness and details, which can clearly be seen by looking at my beard and the grass in the background. When turning HDR on both phones, they both handle the sky really well. Shadows and bright areas are also better optimized, as expected with HDR. The detail and sharpness is still better though on the iPhone 12 Pro as expected. With HDR on auto on both phones, I get almost identical photos as when I had HDR on, so I can assume that both phones decided to use HDR here. If I have the sun in the background, then we get a totally different result. It seems like both phones decided not to use HDR, at least the background in both photos is way overexposed, and the contrast in my face isn't on par with what can be seen in the previous HDR photos. So it seems like the front-facing cameras on both the phones is not good in handling bright backgrounds. So let's check out the front-facing camera in low light. With no display flash on both phones, there doesn't seem to be a big difference between the two phones. They both show similar detail or lack of detail. The only thing that I can really see is that the iPhone 12 Pro photo is a little bit brighter than the iPhone X. Otherwise, the photos are very similar. With display flash set to auto on both phones, both of them decided to use the display flash. It seems like the display flash on the iPhone 12 Pro is a little bit brighter than the iPhone X, but both phones produce very similar photos in this situation. A little bit brighter photo on the iPhone 12 Pro, but similar sharpness and detail in both photos. So setting the flash on auto on both phones, both iPhones use the display flash this time, and even though the iPhone 12 Pro photo is brighter, the iPhone X has better focus and is better overall. With flash off on both phones and night mode on auto on the iPhone 12 Pro, both photos are quite grainy, and even though the iPhone 12 Pro used night mode, it helps a little bit with brightness and detail, but it seems to make the photo even more grainier. So we compared the photos taken by these two phones. But what about the video? Let's start with the main cameras of these phones and focus on how they handle stabilization. During these stabilization tests, I tried to walk at a normal speed and tried to walk the same path every time. We'll start with 1080p 30 frames per second on both cameras. Both the iPhone X and the iPhone 12 Pro are actually handling the stabilization quite well here. But if you look closer at the iPhone 12 Pro video, you can see that it has a little bit smoother and less jerky video. So they've definitely improved the stabilization from the iPhone X to the iPhone 12 Pro. Let's see if we can spot the same difference when upping the quality to 4K but stick to 30 frames per second. Whoa, what a difference here! It almost seems like the iPhone X is not applying any stabilization at all to the 4K video, and it sometimes loses the focus as well in parts of the video, while the iPhone 12 Pro stays rock steady and smooth and keeps the focus through the whole video. Well done, Apple, on the 4K stabilization improvements. Let's step it up a notch and check if there's any difference when shooting in 60 frames per second, but still in 4K. As expected, we get the same results as in the previous comparison. It seems like the iPhone X is not applying any stabilization to the video, and the iPhone 12 Pro is again keeping the video well stabilized. So we looked at the stabilization of the videos. But how about the quality of the video the main cameras of these two phones can produce? We'll start with 1080p 30 frames per second. Here I actually like the color reproduction of the iPhone X better. I feel like the iPhone 12 Pro is a little bit overexposed, especially when looking at the yellow brick. But when walking to the branches, the iPhone 12 Pro is on point with the color reproduction. The iPhone 12 Pro, though, is definitely handling the sun better, keeps a better overall focus, and shows more detail than iPhone X. Let's switch over to 60 frames per second, but keep it at 1080p. This comparison is really similar to the one in 30 frames per second. iPhone X is doing better with the color reproduction at first, but iPhone 12 Pro still takes the cake with the focus and detail in the video. Both phones produce similarly smooth video using the 60 frames per second. Let's up the quality to 4K in 30 frames per second and roll the cameras. I still feel that the iPhone 12 Pro is overexposing a bit, but the exposure is more even and handling the sun better than the iPhone X. As in the previous videos, we are getting some yellow tint on the snow and the white houses in the iPhone X video, which is much better handled in the iPhone 12 Pro video. I feel like the cameras are much closer here in capturing the same detail than they did in the 1080p. But since the iPhone 12 Pro is able to keep a better overall focus during the whole video, we are getting a better focused and detailed shots than the iPhone X. Finally, let's move over to 4K 60 frames per second and see if we can notice any difference there. We get similar difference here in 60 frames per second as in the 30 frames per second. I think part of the issue here with the iPhone X is that we don't have any stabilization in the 4K shots, and that is definitely not helping with the focus of the shots. So for the 4K videos, I would say that the iPhone 12 Pro is a clear winner in overall quality. Let's shift our focus to the focus and see which of the cameras are able to focus faster when the subject changes. Both cameras are actually handling the focus quite well here, but the iPhone 12 Pro is a tad quicker setting the proper focus when the subject changes. The iPhone 12 Pro is also able to get sharper focus and edges around the pole with a beautiful bokeh effect on the trees in the background. I'm wondering if the LiDAR sensor of the iPhone 12 Pro is helping here, or if it's mainly helpful in low light situations. So we looked at the stabilization and quality in different resolution and frame rates. Now I'm interested in seeing how the cameras handle slow motion. Both cameras are capable of recording slow motion in 1080p 240 frames per second. I'm actually surprised that the iPhone 12 Pro doesn't offer slow motion in 4K now, at least at 120 frames per second. But let's compare the slow motion video in 1080p 240 frames per second. In the first slow motion video, the cameras are quite comparable, but the iPhone 12 Pro is still producing a better focused and detailed shot here. You only need to check the detail of the cars on the road and the car that is parked on the right side of the video to see the better focus and sharpness of the video. The smoothness of the slow motion video is similar though. iPhones have actually always been quite good at slow motion video. In the second slow motion video, the iPhone 12 Pro totally fails at getting the focus right. I didn't tap the screen of either the phones to get the focus. I decided to let the phones handle that themselves. So there is not a competition here. The iPhone X clearly wins here with a better slow motion shot. But overall, the iPhone 12 Pro managed to capture a sharper slow motion shot and better focus, at least in the first video. So we looked at the image and video quality, but it is also important to have good audio quality while recording video. So let's compare the audio quality between these phones. Since there was almost no wind while recording this segment, I couldn't compare how they handle the wind noise. You will see an audio icon displayed behind the name of the phone that the audio is played from, so you can try to spot the differences yourself. You might hear dogs barking and birds chirping. Let's see how much the microphones pick up. Just listening to this short clip, it is quite obvious that Apple has improved the audio quality of the iPhone 12 Pro. The audio captured from the iPhone 12 Pro is much richer and I want to say thicker than the audio recorded from the iPhone 10. The audio volume is lower on the iPhone 10 and it is not nearly as sharp as the iPhone 12 Pro audio. In my opinion, Apple has made some good progress with the audio recording of the iPhone 12 Pro. I'm really excited to see the result from the next test, the low light video quality, because I know Apple has made some improvements in regards to the low light photography, and here I would think that the LiDAR sensor kicks in and helps at least with the focus in the low light shots. I shot these in a poorly lit room, but not in total darkness. Let's first shoot some low light video without using the flash of the phones. We'll start with 1080p in 30 frames per second. We immediately see a big difference here. The iPhone 12 Pro produces a much brighter, less grainy and more detailed video. We still have some graininess in the video, but it is still way better than the darker and grainier iPhone 10 video. The focus is actually quite good in both cases. Let's switch to 4K 30 frames per second and see if there's any difference between the cameras. The comparison is quite similar as when recording in 1080p, but it seems like the iPhone 10 has some issues keeping the focus in this shot, which the iPhone 12 Pro has no issues with. So probably the LiDAR sensor is doing its thing now. But as I said earlier, the iPhone 12 Pro provides much brighter and sharper video than the iPhone 10 here. Now let's see the difference when using the flash of each phone in this low light situation. Starting by using the iPhone 12 Pro flash, we of course get a better lit video, but we are getting a much evenly lit video from the iPhone 12 Pro and also much sharper and detailed video. The iPhone 10 is showing more motion blur when the camera is panned around and you get less detail in the video. Switching to the iPhone 10 flash, we get a little bit better results from the iPhone 10 than before. More evenly lit video, but still the iPhone 12 Pro takes the cake here with a more detailed and sharper video. Let's see if there's less difference between the cameras if we go closer to the window in the room, where we get a little bit more light into the shot. We have both cameras set to 1080p 30 frames per second. In this shot, the video is still a little bit grainy from the iPhone 10, but the iPhone 12 Pro is handling this very well and is able to produce very smooth video just by giving the scene a little bit more light. The colors in the iPhone 12 Pro video are also much closer to what the environment looks like in real life. We get more of a yellowish tone in the iPhone 10 video. In 4K, we see very similar differences, but I think we are getting a little bit less grainy video from the iPhone 10 than we did in the 1080p shot. Maybe it's just due to the higher quality of the video. But the difference between the cameras here is still very clear, and the iPhone 12 Pro is a clear winner here in the low light shots. Since the iPhone 12 Pro offers night mode now, I wanted to see how much improvements that makes in video. So I went for a walk in the evening and took some comparison shots. We of course see a clear difference between these two cameras. The iPhone 12 Pro is able to produce much brighter and detailed video than the iPhone 10, even though the video quality isn't that good. But we have to take into account that it is really dark outside and the only light is from the light poles and from the surrounding buildings. We see more detail in the houses. Even the houses in the distance can be seen in more detail in the iPhone 12 Pro video. When standing a little bit closer to some buildings, we get much sharper, brighter and more detailed video from the iPhone 12 Pro than the iPhone 10. Then just for the fun of it, let's see if the low light scene affects the stabilization of the video of these cameras. Checking both 1080p in 30 frames per second and 4K 30 frames per second in this low light scene, I couldn't spot any difference in the stabilization compared to the one I shot during the day. We of course still see that the iPhone 12 Pro is handling the stabilization much better than the iPhone 10, especially in the 4K shots. I think we covered the main camera videos of these two phones quite well. Let's take a look how the front-facing cameras compare. Let's start with the stabilization with both cameras set to 1080p. I'm wondering if the iPhone 10 does have any stabilization on its front-facing camera at all. at least the iPhone 12 Pro front-facing camera is handling the shakiness of me walking much better. But even though the iPhone 10 video is more shaky, it still manages to keep the focus on my face during the whole shot, which the iPhone 12 Pro did as well. So let's up the quality to 4K on the iPhone 12 Pro, but the iPhone 10 does not support 4K on the front-facing camera, so it will stay at 1080p. Even in 4K, the iPhone 12 Pro is still able to stabilize the video and thus providing a much better result than the iPhone 10. The iPhone 12 Pro was a clear winner in the stabilization, but how do these front-facing cameras compare in the quality of the videos they produce? Let's start with both cameras set to 1080p. I think it's obvious who's the winner here. The iPhone 12 Pro gives us a much brighter video and closer to true life colors, as well as handling the sky and the sun in the background much better. The iPhone 10 video is too dark on my body and then overexposed in the sky and in the bright sunlight. Switching to 4K on the iPhone 12 Pro, and as before, the iPhone 10 does not support 4K on the front-facing camera, but it is interesting to see the improvements in quality between these cameras. The iPhone 12 Pro is handling the bright sunlight and the sky in a similar way as when recording in 1080p, but of course we can see much more detail in the video now since the resolution is much higher. Apple has clearly made some big improvements to the front-facing camera on the iPhone 12 Pro in regards to the quality of the video it can produce. Now let's move over to the focus. Is there any difference in how fast the front-facing cameras can focus when the focus subject changes? As we can see in this short focus comparison, the iPhone 12 Pro is much quicker at adapting to the focus on my face and then to the wooden pole, and is also keeping the exposure better than the iPhone 10. The iPhone 10 takes a few seconds to adjust to the new focus object, but you can almost not see when the iPhone 12 Pro is adjusting the focus, since it's so fast. Good job here on the focus improvements. As always in my comparisons, I do audio tests with the front-facing cameras as well, since when recording with the front-facing cameras, the phones might be using different microphones than when recording with the main cameras. So let's do it. We can try to listen to the birds. And we have some traffic far away. The result here is actually quite similar to the main camera audio test. The iPhone 12 Pro records audio in a higher volume, and the audio has more body to it, more filling if you could say so. Basically, the audio is of much better quality in my opinion. The iPhone 10 audio is lower and is not as thick as the iPhone 12 Pro audio. So there is a clear improvement in the audio quality in the iPhone 12 Pro compared to the iPhone 10. Let's go inside and check out the low light performance of the front-facing camera. We'll start with 1080p on both cameras. As you can see, the iPhone 12 Pro camera gives us a brighter and less grainy video. But I think the iPhone 12 Pro camera loses some of the detail with its smoothing technique. When we have the brightness from the window behind me, the iPhone 12 Pro keeps my face much brighter and better overall brightness, while the iPhone 10 struggles with the bright background, resulting in my dark face and overexposed sides of the curtains behind me. If we switch to 4K on the iPhone 12 Pro, which the iPhone 10 does not have, I don't see much difference in the video quality of the iPhone 12 Pro. Maybe a little bit more detail here and there. The difference in brightness and smoothness is the same as before, and the iPhone 12 Pro is still handling the bright background better than the iPhone 10. As with the main cameras, I wanted to see how the front cameras handle the night outside. Both are actually quite terrible. I wouldn't use either of these videos. They are both very dark and not very detailed, but the iPhone 12 Pro is able to lit my face up a little bit more than the iPhone 10. And if you look at the windows of the houses behind me, the iPhone 12 Pro is able to keep the brightness of them more evenly lit than the iPhone 10. Switching to 4K on the iPhone 12 Pro, we get a little bit darker video. It seems like we are getting a little bit more detail in the houses behind me, and still the brightness in the windows is better than the iPhone 10. But still, I don't think this is usable video quality in this scenario. So what is the conclusion of this comparison? It is quite clear that Apple has made some improvements to its cameras and the computational photography between these phones. The iPhone 12 Pro is in most cases able to provide more detailed and sharper photos and videos than the iPhone 10. But the iPhone 12 Pro is struggling more with a lens flare than the iPhone 10. As expected, there are big improvements in the low-light shots for the main cameras, since now we have night mode on all the back cameras, which is not present on the iPhone 10. The improvements aren't as drastic on the front-facing cameras though, especially in low-light situations. I expected more improvements there. It is amazing to see how the iPhone 10 still stacks well up to the iPhone 12 Pro, especially in shots taken outside. But in the end, the iPhone 12 Pro is the winner of this comparison, providing more consistent quality and color accuracy than the iPhone 10. And of course, the night shots are simply whoa! I can't wait to see what improvements Apple will bring to the cameras in their next iPhones. I really hope you liked this video. At least I always enjoy making these comparison videos. I would appreciate if you could subscribe to my channel, since it really helps my channel grow, and if you also click the bell icon, you will always get notified when I publish new videos. See you in my next video.